My name is Nick Vavas. I'm setting out on a journey through the Diocese of Brooklyn and Queens. My goal? To visit 8 parishes in one day and show you why we live in a city of churches.
In case you missed it, this has been my day so far. I began my day-long journey through the Diocese of Brooklyn and Queens by visiting the seat of the diocese, St. James Cathedral. I then visited nearby St. Boniface before making my way to Astoria, Queens to Our Lady of Mount Carmel Church. My trip continues in Queens to Forest Hills and Our Lady, Queen of Martyrs.
Hey everyone, and thanks for joining me again. I'm here in Forest Hills on my way to Our Lady, Queen of Martyrs. Now, I haven't eaten all day and I'm starving, so I'm thinking I'll run in somewhere and grab a quick bite. And in New York City, what's a better quick bite than a slice of pizza? Now, pizza was first created in Naples
around the 18th century when people began adding tomato to their flatbread. It first made its appearance in the U.S. during the 19th century with the arrival of the Italian immigrants. Now, the first official pizzeria is believed to have been founded by Gennaro Lombardi in Little Italy. Back then, an entire pizza cost only 5 cents, but many people couldn't afford this, so they only paid what they could afford just for a piece of the pie, a single slice.
Hey, I know this theater. It's the Midway. It's one of Queens' best movie theaters, and it's huge. Everybody knows about it. It's kind of a landmark here in Queens. Great place to catch a flick, but no time for me today. I've got to get to Our Lady, Queen of Martyrs. Wow, this church is huge. I can't wait to see the inside. Come on.
Nick, one of the first things you see when you come into the church is this plaque, which gives you the name of the church, Our Lady Queen of Martyrs, the bishop, Thomas Malloy, the pastor, Joseph McLaughlin, the builders, the architect, and of course the important date, 1938, when it all began.
So Deacon Greg, one of the first things I noticed when I came in here was the beautiful stained glass.
The stained glass really is extraordinary here on all 4 walls. The theme of it really is the Queen of Martyrs and martyrdom, and so you have 2 remarkable stained glass windows at the back of the church and at either end, dedicated to the Queen of Martyrs. Then you have one window that is dedicated to the first martyr, which is St. Stephen, and another dedicated to St. Agnes, another
Behind us.
famous martyr of the church, yes. It is sacrifice and it is love for Our Lady. We call her the Queen of Martyrs, first of all, because she was present at the foot of the cross with Jesus and shared in his martyrdom. And so this church is really dedicated to her as the Queen of Martyrs and to all those who have suffered and given their lives for the faith.
And is the stained glass the original from when the church was first built?
Yes, it is. One of the things that's really remarkable about this church is they put such effort and such care into creating these windows. They're one of a kind. There's nothing quite like them anywhere else in the world. Although if you look at them, they're very similar to a lot of the great medieval cathedrals, which this was really modeled on, the great Gothic cathedrals. This was in fact modeled on the English Gothic cathedral in Durham, England.
Oh, okay.
And they took a lot of the same design elements and transplanted them here and just made it a little bit smaller, a little bit more intimate, a little bit more modern in a lot of ways, but it still has a very
And yet it
ancient-
seems massive and huge to me. I mean, it's magnificent. It
Yeah.
really is. And the light coming in through the stained glass is, it's wonderful. I mean, it's so vibrant, it's so bright.
And it changes throughout the day because
Oh,
of
it
the way
does.
the church is situated, facing, if you're looking
Are
toward
there
the...
certain times of day where you get light coming in from certain places?
Yes,
Is that what
exactly.
happens?
Because the church, I guess you could say, is on an east-west axis, and then that's north and that's south. So as the sun moves, it changes the character and the color of the
Wow.
interior of the church.
Wow, it's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
It really is.
One of the things you probably noticed when you came in are the beautiful side windows
Yes.
that we have.
Yeah.
And a lot of people take them for granted and don't realize quite how meaningful they are. All of the windows on the north side along Queens Boulevard are dedicated to Christ. All the ones on the south side are dedicated to Mary. And each saint depicts a different aspect of Mary or a different aspect of Christ. And again, it continues the medieval idea of stained glass being a kind of a sermon, a sermon in glass. One of the windows, for example, that's dedicated to Our Lady that's particularly interesting is dedicated to St. Bernard of Clairvaux. He was a Cistercian monk, a great preacher, a person who reformed the Cistercian order, and he had a great devotion to the Blessed Mother. And in fact, he is credited with adding the famous words to the Memorare, O Clement, O loving, O sweet Virgin Mary. And his window is right by what is now the baptistry. And in fact, I preached about that a little bit several months ago, about how appropriate it is that he is looking over those who are coming into the church, because he was a great believer in the reformation of his order and a new way of living religious life.
And that's why that's so meaningful to you?
Yeah.
What makes that?
Yeah. I have a great fondness myself for the Trappists and the Cistercians, and it's nice to have St. Bernard there.
Sure.
You know, there's also another one that is there is St. Rose of Lima, which is, I think, a connection to Our Lady of the Rosary. And there's another window dedicated to Our Lady of the Immaculate Conception, who is the patroness of the Diocese of Brooklyn. So each one tells a little bit of a story and gives you something to meditate and contemplate on.
Wonderful.
Another really interesting detail that's important to pay attention to is the work that went into the altar. And not just the main altar where we celebrate Mass, but also the side altars. For example, right here, you have the altar that's dedicated to the Blessed Mother. And you can see the Blessed Mother in the center holding a palm frond, which is a symbol of martyrdom. And surrounding her are 4 scenes from her life. There is the Annunciation in the upper left. There is the Nativity in Bethlehem. There is going to see the aged Simeon when he predicts that her heart will be pierced by a sword. And then there is the Pietà. There is right after the crucifixion. So these are singular moments in the life of Our Lady, all represented here. And these side altars were very important in the early days of this church because they actually would celebrate daily Mass on these side altars.
So as opposed to the center altar, both side altars were used to celebrate Mass?
Yes.
Why was that?
Yes.
Because there was too many people?
Well,
needed
you had
two
a lot
side
of
altars?
priests.
Oh, there were
and
more priests.
You
Okay.
had more masses being offered, and you know, people still come here to this day for to pray to Our Lady and to offer their lives and to.
And then I also noticed the altar rail, the low altar rail with the gate. Tell me about that. What does that symbolize,
Well, this
or what does
gate
that mean?
is very unusual. You don't see anything like this very often anymore. It depicts a pelican piercing her breast, a mother pelican, and feeding her children with her blood. And this is a very ancient representation of the Eucharist. It goes back all the way to the early days of the church. You don't see it very often anymore, although one place where you do see that represented is the state flag of Louisiana.
Really?
And a lot of people don't realize it. It's the only state flag that actually has a religious symbol
Really?
in it, and it symbolizes the Eucharist.
Back in pre-Vatican II, people would come forward and line up and kneel to
And
receive
kneel.
communion, and they would line up all the way from one end to the other. And when the reforms of Vatican II, the changes came about, they elected to keep this wall, and thank God they did, because it's a beautiful detail and one that you don't see very often.
The pulpit is once again a real work of art, all the hand
So
carving
intricate. It really is beautiful.
that went into it, and depicted around the pulpit. So a lot of people think it's the 4 evangelists, but it's actually Saint, I'm not sure what the order is that they go around, but you'll see depicted St. Ambrose, St. Augustine, St. Peter, and St. Jerome, all of whom have a strong connection to the Word and to preaching. And this pulpit has an interesting little piece of history, because one of the people who used to preach here periodically was Fulton Sheen.
Oh, really?
He was good friends with Bishop Denning, who invited him a
Okay.
couple of times in the 1960s, so he would preach from that pulpit.
A lot of history, huh?
Yeah. You'll see the tabernacle there in the center, and surrounding that are depictions of 4 great saints. At the bottom left, you have St. Patrick. Above him, you have St. Dominic. At the top right, you have St. Francis, and below St. Francis, you have St. Boniface. Patrick and Boniface are interesting because they represent the great immigrant culture that built this diocese and that built this parish. Patrick being the Irish, Boniface being the German. And two of the great, heroes and preachers of the church, St. Francis and St. Dominic. And then above at the very top, once again, below the rose window, there is a carving representing the Queen of Martyrs. In the center, I should mention, you also have Jesus representing the Sacred Heart and offering his heart to all those who come here. Continuing past the main altar, we pass the presider's chair, which is actually a bishop's chair, which was put here for Bishop Denning, and we now use it as the presider's chair at all the masses. And we come to the altar of St. Joseph. And once again, as with the altar dedicated to Mary, there are 4 scenes representing his life.
What are those? Can you tell me?
Sure. At the upper left, you have Joseph and Mary being married. Opposite that, the upper right, you have the flight into Egypt. Jesus has been born and they're fleeing.
Okay.
At the lower left, you have them taking Jesus to the temple for the circumcision.
Mm-hmm.
And then the final scene is the death of Joseph, the final moment of his life. One detail that is interesting about this is directly above Joseph, because he was of the line of David, you have a depiction of King David wearing a crown and holding a harp, because he composed the Psalms. So that's.
And so again, this is the side altar was once used as
For celebrating Mass.
for celebrating Mass.
Low
both side
Masses,
altars.
yeah.
Low
Right.
Mass. Okay.
And after Vatican II, when the tabernacle was moved off of the altar, off of the main altar, it was brought here to the side. It was here for 20 or 30 years and was eventually moved back to the center behind where it is right
Okay.
now. So Nick, let me give you a sense of the neighborhood and a little bit of the history that has gone into this place.
Okay.
Here we are in the middle of Forest Hills. It's a bustling area. You can see we got Ascan Avenue over to your right. Right in front of us, there's Queens Boulevard, now one of the busiest thoroughfares.
I'm guessing it didn't look like that when the church was first built.
It sure didn't. It was basically a 2-lane road connecting Manhattan with Long Island. And this was an area that people went past to get to someplace else.
Right.
It wasn't really much of anything here at all. And in fact, when the parish began, there were just a little over 70 people who were coming to worship. And out of that, now we have over 2,000 families.
And where were they worshiping then, these 70 people?
They started out in private homes. And then on this property, they built a small white wooden chapel, and they worshiped there.
So there was a chapel.
There was
Okay.
a small chapel for about 10 years. And then they built this incredible church that we see now. But in 1927, when they really started in earnest the plans to build this, The Great Gatsby was published. And F. Scott Fitzgerald described this area as being a valley of ashes. It was literally a dump. And like I said, it's where people went from one part from the city to go out to the country. And this was, farmland. There was nothing here.
Wow, and look at it now.
It's really incredible how it's grown, yeah. So this structure is really remarkable for a number of reasons. It's modeled on a cathedral in England, the Durham Cathedral. You can see the incredible stonework.
It's all stonework.
It's all stone, the copper, the wooden doors.
And it was built stone by stone? Literally?
Stone by stone, and the incredible sacrifice that went into it. The school was built originally in 1928, then 10 years later the church and the rectory, and then even after that, the convent. But Father McLaughlin, Monsignor McLaughlin, was very careful to make sure that everything matched perfectly so it was unified, and it makes a tremendous statement.
How long did it take to build this?
Well, the church and rectory took about a year and a half.
That's not bad.
Not
That's
bad at
actually
all.
great. That's
no.
amazing.
And the entire budget for this, the church, the rectory, and the school, was about $360,000.
Wow.
And
what would that be today?
It would be
It's
about
hard to
$10 million
imagine.
today,
Oh my gosh.
conservatively.
It's incredible.
But, and this was the height of the Depression, and people really sacrificed and gave of themselves to make this what it is today.
And is the interior of the church, was that also constructed at the same time? The way that we see it now is exactly how it would have looked?
Pretty much, yeah, exactly. One example of the amazing architectural details that went into this is above the side door here. You can see Jesus at the altar offering his body and blood. St. Peter and St. Paul, two martyrs on either side of him. Two deer drinking from a stream, and the line underneath from the psalm, as the hart panteth after the living waters. And so this is calling people into this place of worship and summoning that. And so one-of-a-kind image, as all the art and all the architectural details are very unique and very original just to this church.
And there's one of these above each of the entrances, a pied à
That's
terre.
Right, and each one has a different story and a different piece of scripture that goes with it. So as I mentioned, the parish has grown phenomenally. We've got over 2,000 families now, and we've had some celebrities who
Really?
lived and worshipped here, going way, way back. Captain Kangaroo, Bob
You're
Keating,
kidding.
was a graduate of our school.
Wow.
Ray Romano, Pia Zadora,
No kidding.
David Caruso, Carol O'Connor, and Geraldine Ferraro lived and worshipped in this church when she was running for vice president.
Wow, that's amazing. And now the famous Deacon Greg. That's amazing.
Here in Queens, we are 2 for 2 amazing churches. Now, how will the third stack up? Let's find out. I'm on my way to Our Lady of Snows in Floral Park. Come on.